Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sandra Crawford. I manage the customer success team at Enghouse Interactive. And since customer success is all about bringing value to you, our customers, I'm excited to be facilitating today's webinar, Leverage Quality Data for Improvements in Agent Performance and Customer Experience. So thanks for joining us today to learn more about what's new with Contact Center Enterprise, CCE, in this third session of the three-part series brought to you by Enghouse and the customer success team. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar is being recorded. You'll receive an email with a copy of the slide deck and the recording of this session over the next few days. We welcome any questions you may have, so please use the GoToWebinar chat pane on the right side of your screen to submit questions at any time throughout the webinar. And then we'll address those questions at the end of the presentation. So if we happen to run out of time before all the questions are answered, don't worry, someone from Enghouse will follow up with you with your question. So now I'd like to introduce our presenters today. Two of my favorite people here at Enghouse. John Cray is Enghouse Interactive's VP of Product Management, and Kai Kaufman is our Senior Director of Technology. Both gentlemen help define the global strategy and release plans for Enghouse contact center solutions. And by understanding industry trends and bringing relevant product solutions to market, they ensure Enghouse Interactive's product portfolio maintains its leadership status in the marketplace. So I will now hand things over to you, John.
Thank you, Sandra. Hey, everybody. Appreciate your time joining us today. As Sandra said, this is the third part of our series. If you didn't get a chance to view the other webinars, the first two in the series, we would encourage you to go in and download the recordings. We're trying to put together kind of a full picture of where we are with the Contact Center Enterprise product from a number of different perspectives. And I think viewing the three webinars together gives you a good picture of where we are in terms of some of the newer trends and innovations going on in the marketplace. So as we did with the other webinars, I'd like to start by putting things in a bit of a market perspective. Always love me some market stats. So we're tapping into a couple of key surveys that we have access to at Enghouse. One is a survey that's done by an organization called Contact Babel. This is a US-based survey where they survey a couple hundred contact centers around various kinds of contact centers around the United States, all kind of spanning lots of different vertical markets, lots of different sizes of contact centers and so on. And then the second survey is done by an organization called Dimension Data, where they survey customers, contact center managers and VPs of customer experience and customer service around the world. I think they tap into 20, 25 different countries for their surveys. So it's a little broader based survey. Both kind of cover this space of customer experience, customer service, and interaction management. And one of the questions that the Contact Babel guys asked is, when a customer contacts you, what is the most important thing for them? And what I did was I bolded the ones that I think apply to this webinar today. We've got first contact resolution, resolving the customer's inquiry on a single interaction. There's polite and friendly employees, where you want the people that are interacting, your agents interacting with customers, to be rated by those customers as being polite, friendly, and helpful. You've got one employee resolution, where maybe it's a first contact, but you had to transfer it 3 times to get to the right person. But maybe the customer doesn't want that transfer and bring in multiple people. Maybe they want to just talk to one person so that they don't have to re-explain themselves 3 times. So is there a way that we can maximize that single employee resolution? And then there's short interaction time, minimizing the time on the phone or on the chat or in the email or whatever that the customer has to spend getting their issue resolved. So 4 of the top 6, I think, reasons or things that are most important to the customer hit directly on this issue of quality in the communication. Is the agent, is the customer getting the best quality of interaction they possibly can? And then data said, where do you measure quality? And I think what's interesting is pretty much every contact center is now recording calls. They're now recording and using those recordings to do some level of evaluation. But a somewhat fewer number, are doing that same kind of quality management technique for digital interactions, text-based media, email, web chat, and so on. And then as you go down the chain, what about callbacks? When I have to schedule a callback to a customer based on either a previous call or an email, how often do I measure the quality of that? And then go all the way back to the business processes, the back office things that are done to support a customer. Maybe in a bank, that loan approval officer that has to work in the background and make sure that we deliver that loan approval in a timely manner with a high quality, those back office functions. So you start to decrease the frequency of measurements of quality as you go down the chain here. And I think one of the things we want to speak to today is how we can help apply this concept of quality across media, across channel types, and across different parts of the customer journey. Go ahead and click. So Data also asked the question in the survey, what tools are you using to measure quality? And we'll speak to many of these approaches in the webinar today. Customer surveys is a very, very high frequency, highly used approach to measuring customer quality and the satisfaction level of customers. But, is it used in all the different ways that you can do surveys? Is it used for both telephone-based surveys and digital electronic surveys? Is it used for polling customers as well as delivering surveys to customers in real time, like, for example, right after an interaction? Those kinds of different approaches is something we want to speak to. And then we kind of go down the chain here to lower and lower frequency as you move on. And you can see that some of the more sophisticated, what you might call artificial intelligence based measurements of quality, like running interaction analytics or analyzing the sentiment or the feeling of customers. Are they happy or are they dissatisfied with your level of service based on the interaction content? Those are more sophisticated techniques, difficult to deploy and maybe requiring more resources, requiring more CPU or more disk space to do that, or more access to the cloud. These kinds of things are harder and thus kind of reduce in frequency of usage as you go down the chain. So we'll speak to some of these as we go through the webinar today. Go ahead and click. And then on the same kind of vein, Dimension Data asked, okay, given that you use these different techniques for measuring quality, what actual metrics are you using? And a straight ahead metric for customer satisfaction level, scale of 1 to 5, scale of 1 to 10, whatever that might be, is used most often. And then we start to get into the quality scores for the interaction or the agents, the net promoter score, which a few years back was an extremely hot topic, has maybe lost a little bit of its luster over the last few years, but is still a heavily used metric. The net promoter score being, what's your likelihood for recommending us to someone else in a single metric. And then going down the chain from there into lower and lower things like customer retention and churn, the value of customers, the net promoter score for employees as opposed to customers, the level of effort it takes to service customer, and so on. Why are some of these more sophisticated metrics used less often? Probably mostly because they're much more difficult to measure. In some cases, they require bringing data together from multiple different kinds of applications and cross-referencing that data to come up with a score. So it can be much more sophisticated, it can be much more difficult. But these are some of the common metrics that are used by organizations. Go ahead and click. This, I think, is something that Contact Babel put in place that is a very telling question. They asked what characteristic was most encouraged in agents And then they asked, how do you reward your agents? And there's a key difference here, specifically in this area of customer feedback and customer satisfaction. When they asked the question of contact center managers, what characteristic do you encourage most of the time? Their number one characteristic was that the customers were satisfied with the interactions and that the customer provided high value feedback. But when they asked, how do you reward your agents financially and with bonuses and in their reviews? The answer was that CSAT and customer feedback dropped down to fourth, and other metrics like attendance and punctuality and adherence to schedule rose to the top. So even though those are key metrics to, especially for agents that are on a schedule and that are required to clock in and out at certain times, even though they are very important metrics, they may not be the most important metric to measure the value to your business. So it's important, and this is the point that Contact Babel's survey was trying to make, it's important to have what you reward match up with what you encourage. And the CSAT and feedback scores specifically are tied to the value of the interaction with your customers. Go ahead and click. So lastly, just in terms of the metrics coming out of these surveys, I think we wanted to take a look at the prevalence of the techniques used to measure quality. And again, this data came from the Contact Babel survey. In terms of measuring techniques versus the complexity of implementation of those techniques. So we took a stab at the complexity metric. The Contact Babel prevalence data is used for the prevalence, but they fall into a very interesting curve, starting with what actual media types or channel types, communication channels, are you using to drive your evaluations? Evaluation in this case means that you're recording this media and then someone, either a supervisor or a separate QA department within your business, are listening to or viewing these interactions and then going through a manual process of scoring them using an evaluation tool. We're going to speak to that kind of tool and what it looks like today, but this is kind of how it fell out from a prevalence perspective. And of course, it's a little bit more complex to evaluate text media than it is to evaluate recorded calls, simply because with text media that you're also going to want to apply other logic to the evaluation. Like you're going to want to look for keywords or key phrases. You're going to want to possibly look for warning flags in the text and run some analytics on that. Another thing that's often done, about half the time in the surveyed customers, is correlating the customer survey data that they run. And again, we saw customer surveys used 80+% of the time, but the correlation of that customer survey data with the actual quality assurance of agents was only implemented about half of the time. Now, is that hard to do? Well, now you're crossing two kinds of data, survey data and agent evaluation information together. So that makes it a little more complex. But again, it's being done whether manual or through automation about half the time. And then there's an interesting one coming up called mystery shopping. And this is very easy to implement because it requires little or no automation and is done about a third of the time. And mystery shopping means actually acting like your customer, having employees of the business call in or text in or email in and see how they're treated, how they're handled by the automation and by the agents that you have in place for customer service. So I'm acting as a mystery shopper in this case. And it might not be shopping for a product, it might be shopping for service. But in this case, about a third of the time, businesses are implementing this technique, this random sampling technique for measuring quality. And then we go down to the lower prevalence, higher complexity techniques, which have to do with running analytics on your data. And here again is where it gets a lot more sophisticated, because in this case, we have to apply CPU power, which might be on premise or might be in the cloud, and feed the data, whether it's recorded calls or recorded text media or other forms of data that you collect on your customers into an engine that can analyze the quality of those interactions. Much more sophisticated, and as a result, much lower prevalence, again, because of cost and complexity, but also because some of these techniques are very new to the market and are still evolving. So if you look at this chart in total, there's follows kind of a little bit of a natural curve where the easiest stuff to implement is used most often. And so that's, I think, one of the things that we want to speak to today is how do you now start to apply the different portfolio options available in a portfolio like Enghouse's to these problems of quality. Go ahead and click. So let's take a look at where we're at with the portfolio. So at the center of our quality management is a product that Enghouse has called the Quality Management Suite, or QMS. So this suite is a set of tools that taps into the different media channels that you use for communicating with your customers. It might be your calls through voice recording. It might be your emails or chats or SMSs or social media through text media recording, or it might be actually watching what the agent does on the screen and recording that either selectively by application or to record the entire screen. But these techniques can be used in order to capture the interactions. In the absence of anything else, where you're just recording the channels of communication themselves, you can answer a basic question. If the customer says, hey, I said X and you never shipped me that product, or you never delivered to me that service, the agent or supervisor or manager in the contact center can now prove whether the customer said that or not. Often this is called compliance, to be able to record all interactions and all agent actions so that later you can go back in and check and validate whether that happened or not. But what do we need on top of that? In addition to just basic recording, if you tie this to the data that's stored in the CCE product, now you've got information about the customer and about the interaction that QMS doesn't have on its own, just listening to the media. So now I'm applying logic and intelligence that I've captured through CCE about the customer and the interactions to these recordings. And now I can look up interactions based on company name, or based on what product that customer was calling about, or based on the time frame that the interaction occurred, or based on basically any interaction property that you capture, either tied into your CRM system or your ERP system or whatever you might use for business intelligence on customers and on their issues. So now I can tie it to all of that data, feed that connection point into QMS, and now I can search for these recordings based on any criteria you choose. But then what? What do I want to do with the fact that I can search? Now I layer on what QMS calls agent evaluation. And now I can answer questions like, did my agents greet the customer properly? Did they offer the marketing promotion from this week? What was the overall satisfaction level of the customer? Now I'm a supervisor, now I'm a manager, now I'm a quality assurance department, listening to these media recordings and analyzing them and going through and giving them a score across a number of different criteria. So we're getting there, right? We're starting to go up the chain of quality metrics into more sophisticated metrics by layering on more aspects of a full portfolio for quality. What else can I do? Well, on CCE, I can leverage CCE's add-on module called Survey Manager. And with this, I can proactively drive out surveys, by calling people or sending them digital forms of surveys. I can send customers directly from an interaction into a post-interaction survey. And with this, I can start measuring the overall levels of customer satisfaction and getting at some of those other metrics that we were talking about on previous slides, like overall happiness ratings, the NPS score, and whatever metrics you decide to use across any set of criteria you decide that you want to capture in surveys. And then lastly, I can layer on something else with QMS, a product called the Vocal Coach. And this is that speech analytics engine where I can now listen to interactions, and I can do it depending on the level of CPU power I want to apply to this. I can do it either in real time or using historical recordings, and I can measure things like agent adherence to the script they were given for interacting with customers. And then I can do some of what we call soft evaluations, like measure the interruption rate. Were agents interrupting the customer when the customer tried to speak? What was the stress level of the customer? Were they getting upset? Was the agent speaking clearly or loudly enough? There are lots of these kinds of metrics that we can measure as soft evaluations and apply those to your recorded or real-time conversations and feed back to both the agent and the manager some of these more sophisticated metrics. So if you look at this slide in total, we're answering most of the questions that we had identified from those surveys through a suite or portfolio of applications that are all integrated tightly together into an overall solution. So with that, let's let Kai talk to us about exactly how we go about this. How do we tie these applications together, and what value do we provide when we do that? Kai?
All right, thanks, John. So just to stay on this slide for just 1 second, I think what's interesting is these are operational questions, right? These are questions that you're going to be asking day in, day out of the business or even of your contact center yourselves. And our job is to provide a portfolio or a toolkit that allows you to get drill down to the answers of each one of those questions. So I'm going to take you a little bit through each one of those toolkits, so to speak, and demonstrate, I guess, some of the nuts and bolts of how we go about getting to these answers, right? So this first slide here it's similar in concept to how John has just laid out the business questions, and we're going to create some building blocks here around, how can we take one component and add onto it with other components and start to increase the value, and also start answering some of the more complex questions and across different media channels and whatnot. So if we take a basic call recording solution, which many of you probably have installed, whether it's standalone or whether it's integrated, that solution in itself is going to give you basic information around who was called maybe by your agent, or the caller ID of the person calling in, the agent themselves, talk time, and basic metadata that comes with just basic recordings. And that's fine, and that gives you a lot of the compliance capability that John was talking about. So it certainly gives you a certain level of power. But where we really start to get into answering some of the questions, and John alluded to this as well, is when we integrate call recording into the contact center, you start asking questions around business information or business key identifiers, such as an account ID, for example, or a queue. So your queues are likely mapped to the products or services that you're offering. And your questions, your campaigns around quality are often driven specifically around those things, or maybe call outcomes represented as wrap-ups. So being able to understand how many particular interactions resulted in a particular disposition or wrap-up, and you can drill down on your call recordings that way. So just integrating the contact center itself allows you to add a lot of further detail and search capability into your quality management. But we can take this one step further, and if you remember the last webinar, we actually hinted at us being able to do text-based or digital media quality management as well. And so what we've introduced is the ability to bring in things like email, SMS, social interactions or instant messaging, as well as traditional web chat. And so now you have all of these text-based channels that are going to be available as well, and they give you further information. So you're getting different ways to identify customers, an email address, for example, or the overall handle time. So it's not even talk time anymore, but How long did it take to craft a particular email? How long was somebody on a chat? So that type of information will be relevant in your quality management as well. And that information will come most likely out of your contact center application as well, in this case, CCE. So CCE has the ability to drive this information into our quality management component and really enable, at the end of the day, full omni-channel evaluation. So now you're not just evaluating across voice, you're also evaluating across the digital medias. And so we're putting all of this within reach just through the different components that we're offering in terms of integration and having those products integrated. So it gives you a full, you could almost say, customer journey where you can evaluate a customer's journey in maybe a particular quality management exercise where you may have been made aware that a particular customer, maybe they didn't give you a good CSAT score on a survey that may have triggered investigations. So now you can actually go and look for that information in the quality management suite and do a full review of that information as well. So what does that actually look like? So our quality management suite, which we have on the screen here, it provides you, this basically will do call recording. It does the digital medias as well. And so just from an end user perspective, we have the ability to really start drilling down on some of these particular pieces of data that we have that are going to address some of those business questions that are being asked. So first, basic things, what type of media? I would actually argue that a lot of the business questions aren't going to be media specific. You're really looking at what is that business identifier, that service or that product or that particular account that you're looking for is going to be the real thing that you're going to be searching by. So what we can do in CCE, we call them interaction properties. What we can do here is search on those interaction properties because that data has been brought over into the quality management suite. And we can, for instance, in this example, we search for a company name. But what we can do is have multiple drill downs. So maybe we're not searching by company. Maybe we're doing something by zip code where there's a larger aggregate of information. Maybe we need to drill down a little bit further into a particular service that we're interested in for that particular zip code. So different identifiers can be used to really drill down on the information. And once we do that search, we're going to get the results. And not only are we just getting information about the calls or the emails or the SMS, we are also getting that additional data. So you can see, for example, in the customer ID column, that could very well be a ticket number, for example. So if we are doing research on a particular ticket that may have been problematic, and again, maybe some negative feedback came back, we can drill down on that ticket. Multiple agents might have been involved, multiple people in the end customer might have been involved, but we can really see a journey for that particular ticket, for example. So again, based on business data, not so much data on the particular media that's coming in. So it's quite powerful in the sense that it really starts to enable some of those questions that John had mentioned earlier, right? So how is a particular product doing? Why am I seeing a lower customer sat score in part of my business? And I can start drilling down based on those terms. Now we've talked about text media evaluations here. And what I'm showing you here is actually a screen of what a web chat might look like for somebody that is confirming an appointment with a healthcare organization, for example, right? So on the left-hand side of the screen, you actually see the transcript. And on the right side, you see the evaluation. Now the evaluation is across all channels, meaning that I can define an evaluation and I can review calls, I can review emails, I can review web chats, SMS conversations, whatever they might be. And all of those reviews will contribute to the overall score of that evaluation. They all get bundled up and put under one evaluation. So it's not media specific. And similar to what we can do with voice, where you can bookmark a little segment that might speak to a particular rating you're giving this agent, we can just as well easily bookmark a particular piece of text that says, okay, this agent did a good job here. He was polite, or he, provided the correct advice. Whatever, question you're trying to answer, it gives you the ability to tie proof to your rating for that agent. And later when you go through that with the agent, you can pull those up and they can see, oh, okay, that was good, right? I was good on that part of it, and that's why I got a good score on it. Now, what's really cool about this is, if you remember from session 1 of this webinar series, we actually introduced Touchpoint to you. Now, Touchpoint has extensibility in it, and what we've done here is we have included our quality management evaluation component here within Touchpoint itself. So consider this: maybe you are a team lead that still has a responsibility for taking calls out of queue and handling interactions just like any other agent, but also have some supervisory and even quality management responsibilities. So with that, as a team leader, I'm not juggling multiple applications. We can really configure Touchpoint to be a one-stop shop for all the applications that you're going to need to be successful at your role during the day. So you're not switching between lots of applications, signing in, and so on and so on. So this was really neat in that it all kind of comes together, and you have this multitude of roles that we can offer through one interface. So John, I think turn it to you here.
Yeah, thanks, Kai. So QMS has access to the media path for conversations. That's how it does its thing, right? It has to listen into calls so that it can record them and then allow you to evaluate them. It has to listen into text media, which it actually gets from CCE. CCE conveys the text media over to QMS so that it can record those and evaluate those as well. Once we have those recorded interactions, we can actually provide some speech analytics for the voice side of it. Right now, we don't yet have a text analytics capability. We're working on that behind the scenes. But for speech, we can take QMS's access to the media path and support with that either a real-time analysis of live conversations between agents and customers, or an analysis of calls that have been recorded by QMS and put into QMS's recorded call database. We can do it either way. Now, with real time, what does that mean? It means with a tool, we can actually coach the agent as they speak. So we can say, well, you should really adhere to the script. You didn't really greet the customer appropriately, or you didn't offer this month's promotion, or you didn't follow the script for this kind of problem the customer is reporting. You need to follow the script. And it can provide red X's next to the areas where they're not doing script adherence, and green check marks, for example, next to the areas where they are. Similarly, they can provide, the tool can provide a level of analysis of what we call soft evaluators, which we were talking about before. And again, there are quite a number of these where in real time you can tell the agent, hey, you're interrupting the customer. Actually flag it as it occurs so that the agent can be notified and can adjust their behavior. Similarly, you can say, you're talking a much higher percentage of the time. You need to be listening more. The percentage of time the customer is speaking versus the percentage of time the agent is speaking is something we can actually analyze and report on. And then there's all kinds of things on clarity and volume. You're not speaking loudly enough. You're not speaking clearly enough. Coaching tools for the agent to improve their quality in real time. And then what if I don't want to do it real time? What if I want to do it after the fact using recordings? Well, there I'm actually identifying areas of interest to the supervisor or the manager or the QA department, so I can flag interactions that then you may want to evaluate in a more detailed fashion. So think about that. Instead of having to say, take a random sampling of calls to evaluate, or in order to, just sort of take a wild guess of which agent needs the most attention, maybe I can actually flag the interactions with speech analytics that I should be paying attention to, the ones where the customer's stress level was higher, or the ones where the crosstalk ratio was too high, or whatever it might be, and then go in and listen and evaluate those. Now I'm using two technologies in parallel to really focus in on the interactions that deserve the most attention and the agents that merit the most coaching. And that is a really, really high value way, I think, to look at applying different technologies to the problem of quality. Back to you, Kai.
Okay. So we also talked a little bit about surveys, and it's the real question is how happy or how satisfied are my customers with the product or the service that I'm bringing them, right? And you can ask them that question in a multitude of ways. You can do it immediately once somebody hangs up with an agent. I'm sure you've all heard it in IVR. Would you be willing to stay on after you finish with the agent to answer one or two questions in terms of a survey? So that capability, the benefit there is you have somebody on the phone already, and they probably feel, that extra 30 seconds of time, they can go ahead and spare that. So it's strategic and get them while you have their attention, right? But you can also do surveys in terms of business roles, so business role driven. So this could be revolved around maybe you are campaigning on a particular queue, or maybe it's for a particular service level customer. So maybe somebody is platinum service, and you're really interested in making sure that your platinum customers are satisfied. And those are all, again, stored as interaction properties or properties that you're managing in the contact center. And those can be used to trigger some of these business rules. Maybe there is agent-initiated surveys as well, right? So maybe the agent, you're giving the agent a choice, and they could do it through a wrap-up code, for example, send this person a survey. And then the last piece is it's more scheduled, I would say, so or maybe event-driven from a larger business initiative where you really want to run a campaign. So you want to send a survey request out to a list of your customers because you're really interested in what that CSAT score is. So basic things around survey. And I think this is where it gets really interesting is if you're familiar with Interaction Vault, for example, in CCE, which really is a good way to portray the customer journey, these surveys become part of that customer journey. So you see here is actually a screenshot of what's been logged as an interaction because we are communicating with that customer as a survey media type, and we are tracking that response, and those responses are searchable as well. So let's say, this obviously would be an example of a stellar review, but you can definitely trigger off of different answers in surveys. So let's say your experience with the agent was actually not satisfactory or very poor even. Those things can trigger and alert a supervisor, team lead, or even your quality management team, and that can be used as a trigger to come back into the quality management suite using the information that you have with the contact center, whether that's an account ID, you obviously know who the agent is, and you can do some further research and circle back to the tools we've already shown you in terms of pulling up voice recordings or any of the text-based medias. So it's a nice round trip that you can create with some of these things, and some of these tools will feed each other and will actually almost exponentially start adding value as you implement each one of these. And speaking of iVault, so in terms of the actual call recordings and integrating the contact center into our quality management suite, this might be coming from a different direction. I think in a lot of organizations, when they work in the quality management tools, they have a specific agenda. They're looking at quality and evaluations and bettering the organization there. But you might be coming at it from the other direction in iVault, where maybe you're trying to just build more context around an interaction that you're currently handling. So you have, as John mentioned previously, you know, if you can't always get the same agent on the phone or through interactions consistently as you're working through an issue, we then have the tools, maybe if it's a new agent that picks up the case, that they can go back and start doing research in order to bring more context to the customer they're currently handling. And as part of that, so they can search on the same contact center data, all of these business-driven rules or the business data. And what they'll get access to is the actual call recording, and we also obviously offer the web chat transcripts and the email transcripts, etc. And even the survey responses, right? Back to the previous slide, where as an agent, I can build all that context up, see the history, and then get an understanding of what's happening. So, and this is just an example of what it looks like when I pull up a recording with our quality management suite. And yeah, it's a basic player, but it gets the agent the access to the media. So, and I think what we have coming up here is really cool, but I'll let John speak to this.
Yeah, so QMS is working on an advancement to their technology to actually take the recorded calls and pass them through an engine which transcribes them into text. So this is targeted for release that will be available first quarter of 2019. So we're still a few months away from that. But when that's available, that will allow you to take either a selective set of recorded calls or basically all the calls that you want to pass through the engine, pass them through this transcription, and provide indexable text, meaning that you would then be able to search on that text for content. So again, we're amping up the power of being able to identify the interactions that you want to target for quality improvements. You know, if you think about that, it also amps up compliance as well. I want to find the interactions where a specific topic was discussed or where a specific problem came up, and cross that with a given customer or a given time frame or whatever it might be. You're starting to get a very, very sophisticated level of search capabilities now, not just for text media, but also for voice. And that's a very, very powerful story when you apply quality metrics to that. And again, you can set up the transcription rules based on specifics, like only do it for these calls in this queue, or you can have the agent ask for it on demand or a supervisor ask for it for a monitored call on demand, or whatever you want. It's kind of your choice how you want to set it up. Very, very powerful. We're using a third-party technology from Nuance under the covers to pull that off. Nuance has we actually rated a number of different technologies, and Nuance came out on top in terms of the quality of the transcription, the amount of time it gets the transcription right. You know, we ran our own analysis like that and on that, and chose Nuance as our chosen third-party technique to do that. So we're very proud of this. It could be a really, really cool addition to the QMS portfolio, and of course overall the CCE portfolio provides a lot of power in quality analysis. And then one more quick thing is it can do it for multiple languages. So it's not just an English language transcription. It could be French, German, Spanish, most of the sort of popular languages in which we represent the applications today. So very, very powerful. And you can actually support multiple languages in the same contact center as well.
And one thing, John, maybe worth mentioning here is if you look at the consumption models, if you remember all the way back to your slide around prevalence and complexity, some of these technologies that are more advanced are harder to obtain because of the processing power and really inherently costs, right? So I think giving these options around having just bundles and selective processing should make those much, much more obtainable.
That's true. And QMS also is going to expose a configuration parameter where you can decide to do fast transcription or slower transcription. And as you might guess, the fast transcription would have a little bit lower quality of transcription, but would be able to handle more calls on fewer CPUs, whereas the slower transcription would basically be able to fully analyze a call and have a very, very high success rate of transcribing the data. So it kind of depends on the level of accuracy that you need when you're doing these transcriptions, how exactly right you want them to be, whether you're okay with catching things periodically, or whether you really, really want it to be highly accurate. And you have a choice there in these tuning parameters to do that. It's kind of the state of the art of the technology today, is what it can and can't do based on CPU cycles.
Yep.
So I guess we just kind of wanted to wrap up here by saying this problem of quality is an interesting one. There are lots of different techniques for how you analyze the quality of your communications with your customers, and which techniques you apply, of course, does correlate directly to how you want to run your business and guarantee and maximize and improve that quality and evolve it over time, and how you want to approach the problem of coaching agents to do better. In some cases, you might want to find your best agents and use samples of their interactions to coach less experienced agents. You can do that with these kinds of tools. In some cases, you want to do random samplings so that you can get a feel for how things are going. And in some cases, you want to zero in on exactly the interactions that you want to pay attention to and alert yourself to problems as they occur and pay attention to those. In some cases, you want to correlate the data that you get from surveys with the data that you get from evaluating agents and see if they make sense together and tie them together to improve overall customer satisfaction. In some cases, you may not care about that correlation. So it really depends on your own business and how you want to run things. What we wanted to get across, I guess, in this webinar is that we provide a portfolio of solutions that are integrated together that let you pick and choose the ways you want to measure quality and apply those techniques to maximize and optimize your business. So in the spirit of that, if you'll click, Kai, we have a customer success program, and I guess we'll let Sandra speak to this.
Yeah, and then it's almost question time. So as a reminder, please type all your questions in the chat pane in the GoToWebinar interface. And as John mentioned earlier, this was the third webinar in the three-part series, all about CCE and version 9.1. So if you were not able to attend one of those earlier sessions or would like access to any of the recordings, please let me know, contact your customer success specialist, or email the email address here at the bottom here, customersuccess@enghouse.com. And quick moment again, just a little plug for the customer success team and some of the things you'll be seeing from the team: educational webinars like this one, regular business reviews, tips and tricks on how to maximize your in-house investment, communication on latest product releases, updates, and new features, plus any live training and network events in your area. So let's check out our questions here. We had, looks like somebody's still typing, but we had a couple come in during the session. So first question: do all these different products depend on each other? Who wants to take that one?
I can. This is John. So go back a slide, Kai, to where we were actually viewing the multiple products in the portfolio integrated together. There we go. Yep. So yeah, these actually are separate components, but they do integrate together in order to provide more value through integration. But the question was, could you run, I think alluded to the question of, could you run some without others? And the answer is yes. So for example, you could deploy QMS to just record calls without CCE integration. You wouldn't get that metadata, that data about company and product and other information flowing in, but you could deploy QMS to do the recordings themselves. Could you deploy just CCE and QMS together to get that value without, say, Survey Manager or Vocal Coach? Yes, you certainly could. You can even layer things on like Agent Evaluation later. So start with recording and then layer on agent evaluation. These things are modular and separate enough to be used independently or integrated enough to be used together.
Great.
I think one thing to add there too is, if you do have CCE and QMS, for example, just as a situation that you might have, but you have another organizational unit that you want to do call recording for, but isn't part of the contact center. You could actually extend that same quality so QMS instance to that second organization in your business without having to bring along the CCE component, for example, or vice versa. You can extend your contact center without necessarily having to extend call recording either. So the partitioning capabilities within each one of these components allow you to set up different business units and even have different mixes of capability within those business units, all running on the same infrastructure, on the same deployment.
Thanks, Kai. That's kind of funny. It leads into the next question, and I think you just answered it, unless you want to expand on it. Can these techniques for quality management be used outside the contact center? Do you want to expand on that at all, or?
Well, John? I mean, John, maybe I think the business questions are the same, right?
They are, yeah. QMS, for example, is used often outside the boundaries of the contact center, like a financial organization that wants to record all their calls. It's not a, for compliance purposes, it's not a contact center, a formal contact center per se, but it's people who are talking with people outside the business about their financial interactions and need to record those. There's all kinds of use cases where QMS is used outside the boundaries of a traditional contact center application. Could you use Survey Manager outside the contact center? Of course you could. You could run surveys on really any aspect of your business. Could you use Vocal Coach to analyze conversations even within your business? You could. So there's lots of possible use cases that you can dream up, and there's nothing that ties these applications directly to the contact center. The one, of course, that's tied the most is CCE, because it's built, as a contact center application. But the others can be used virtually in a boundaryless way across your enterprise.
Perfect. And then I think this is the last question, at least so far. Can I evaluate interactions that are transferred between agents?
Oh, that's an interesting question. And then QMS actually does have that capability built in. It's called chained interactions. So they have the ability to, if one agent, say, sends an email to another or sends a call to another through a call transfer, QMS records that in their database as two separate interactions that can be evaluated, but that are chained together. So if you're on the QMS evaluation screen, say for agent A, and I'm evaluating how well that agent did, I can see down in a little section of that screen, there's a chained interaction, a related interaction to that, and that's when that call was transferred to agent number 2, agent B, and that agent can then be separately evaluated with a single click. So I can evaluate the interaction in its entirety if I'm looking at it from the customer's perspective, or I can evaluate it per agent and then know that those two are chained together. So it's a very powerful capability, but it does provide you that level of sophistication as well.
Thank you, John. Let's see, I don't see any more questions here. So unless one of you have anything to add, John or Kai, we'll go ahead and close her up.
No, I would just add. Oh, go ahead, Kai. Sorry.
I was just going to say thanks for joining and listening.
Me too. And thanks especially to the folks who attended all 3 of our webinars. We really appreciate it. We'll of course do more of these as we continue to innovate and enhance the products. But thank you very much for your loyalty. Appreciate it.
Perfect. So this concludes today's webinar. I'd like to thank our presenters, John and Kai, and all you customers for attending. So thanks for your time. Have a great day.